During the heart of the first major console war between the SNES and Genesis, there was a lot of mudslinging between Nintendo and Sega. Nintendo was viewed by some as the more family-friendly option, but Sega went for the hip, new kid on the block vibe that appealed to the youth culture of the 1990s. Sega employed plenty of creative tactics to increase its visibility in the mainstream, including employing celebrity talent to market their products. The biggest star affiliated with Sega was none other than the king of pop himself, Michael Jackson. The Japanese developer had partnered up with Jackson at the start of the decade to create Moonwalker, a video game adaptation of the star's film, based in turn on his trademark dance move, the moonwalk. Jackson's name was plastered all over the game and marketing materials, earning it a lot of buzz at its release and turning the game into a cult classic. One notable aspect about the game is that it included synthesized versions of several of Jackson's hit songs, including Beat It and Smooth Criminal. Ironically, it would be the subject of Jackson's music in another Sega game that would spark a decades-long debate. That's right, folks, it's time for us to finally take a look into the story behind Michael Jackson's involvement in the 1994 Sega Genesis blockbuster, Sonic 3. After the release of Sonic 3, players began to note that music in the game sounded similar to some of Michael Jackson's music. For over a decade, it was mostly hearsay until some interviews began to appear with former Sonic 3 staff. A handful of key interviews have managed to shed some light on this subject, and original research compiled by the Sonic fanbase has documented similarities between specific songs in Sonic 3 and tracks from various Michael Jackson albums. The first major breakthrough came back in August 2005 when a Sonic fan named HXC conducted an interview with Roger Hector, the former director of Sega Technical Institute. When Mr. Hector was asked about his favorite project, he responded with the following statement. Sonic 3, also called Sonic & Knuckles, was a lot of fun, but it was also very difficult. Michael Jackson was originally brought in to compose all the music for the game, but at the very end, his work was dropped after his scandals became public. This caused a lot of problems and required a lot of reworking, but the game turned out great in the end. Fans now had a first-hand confirmation of Jackson's involvement from somebody who was directly involved with the development of Sonic 3. But Mr. Hector said the music was ultimately dropped. Despite the claim, fans weren't convinced. In 2006, somebody going by the alias QJimbo published a video analyzing certain tracks in Sonic 3 and comparing them to Michael Jackson's music. The video originally asserted that several songs in Sonic 3 contained elements of Jackson's work, though since its release, it's been amended with new findings. In its most current version, the video asserts that Jackson's work can be found in the music from both acts of Carnival Night Zone. First spotted by Ben2K9, the horns played in Jackson's song Jam from the 1991 album Dangerous can apparently be heard in Carnival Night Zone's theme. It's also believed that some samples from the song Jam appear in the stage's music too, the sound of breaking glass, as well as rapper Heavy D uttering the word jam. What's interesting about these claims is that Ben2K9 made them before Jackson's involvement on Sonic 3 was public knowledge. There are also allegedly similarities between the ending credits of Sonic 3 and Jackson's Stranger in Moscow from the album History, Past, Present, and Future Book 1. The opening strings in the song share a strong similarity to the synthesized notes heard during the first part of the ending theme. This finding was also first brought to light by Shade. What's notable about this is that Stranger in Moscow was released 2 years after Sonic 3. However, Jackson said he originally wrote the song in 1993, roughly a year before Sonic 3 was released. There was a renewed interest in the subject after the release of QJimbo's video, prompting more discussion about the findings fans had unearthed. Other discoveries had come to light, including the alteration of many of the aforementioned tracks in a remake of the game for the PC, the Sonic & Knuckles collection. Another interesting tidbit is found in the discography of musician Sirocco Jones. While he's listed in the Sonic 3 game credits, his website also lists Jackson as the composer for levels 2 and 3. Sega eventually threw its hat into the ring with the release of Sonic's Ultimate Genesis collection in 2009. In the Did You Know Trivia section for Sonic 3, it mentions Jackson's involvement with the game. These findings, along with the original discoveries presented in Q-Jimbo's video, led to speculation that Michael Jackson's music made it into the final version of Sonic 3, despite Roger Hector's claims to the contrary, and that Sega simply didn't credit Jackson to possibly avoid legal issues. Historically, Sega has remained mum on the topic. But in 2009, an interview surfaced in a French Michael Jackson fan magazine called Black and White, which appeared to reconfirm the speculation. The interview was with Brad Buxer, a musician who worked with Jackson for many years, who was also credited by name in Sonic 3. During the interview, Black and White asked Mr. Buxer to clarify the rumor that Michael Jackson had composed for Sonic 3, to which he said the following: "I've never played Sonic 3, and I do not know what the developers have kept from the tracks on which Michael and I have worked, but we did compose the music playing. Michael called me at the time to give him a helping hand on this project, and that's what I did. And if he's not credited for composing the music, it's because he was not happy with the resulting sound coming out of the console. At the time, game consoles did not allow an optimal sound reproduction, and Michael found it frustrating. He did not want to be associated with a product that devalued his music." The publication then mentioned that they believed the chords from Stranger in Moscow could be heard in the game's music. Mr. Buxer replied with the following statement: "Yes, Michael and I had made the following arrangements for the game, and it has served as the basis for Stranger in Moscow. More than any other song that I worked on with Michael, Stranger in Moscow is where I made my most artistic leg. I'm not credited as co-composer on this track, but I have worked closely with Michael on the composition and structure of this song. I also played virtually all instruments." When the interview became widely publicized, fans believed this interview seemingly cemented the fact that Jackson's work and music made it into the final version of the game. With that revelation, the mystery appeared to come to a close, but we had some concerns with the conclusion. After rereading Buxer's interview, he only confirms he and Jackson composed music for Sonic 3. He claims he never played or saw the final product and states he has no idea what Sega did with the tracks the duo composed. While it does confirm what Roger Hector said years before about Jackson being brought on to compose, nowhere does it explicitly state those tracks can be heard in the game. What's even odder is that Mr. Hector and Mr. Buxer offered different explanations for why Jackson's music was ultimately dropped from the game. Roger Hector said Sega wanted to distance itself from Jackson when the child sex abuse accusations emerged in the summer of 1993. Brad Buxer assumed if the music was dropped, it was because Jackson was unhappy with the sound quality produced by the sound chip on the Sega Genesis. Additionally, there was an interview conducted in August 2008 with another of Sonic 3's composers, Howard Drawson, who stated Jackson, while originally slated to compose the music for the game, had no involvement in the end. He also offered the same explanation as Roger Hector did for why Sega dropped Jackson from the project. Given the conflicting reports and the lack of a firm confirmation of the fan findings over the years, we figured it was our turn to help bring some closure to this nearly 20-year-old debate. Usually, on pop fiction, you're used to us performing some sort of test to see if a myth is true or false. However, in this case, there's literally nothing to test out. Rather, to get to the bottom of this mystery, we had to do some old-fashioned detective work. We figured the best place to start was to track down Roger Hector and Brad Buxer and ask them to confirm they actually conducted the interviews cited so frequently by fans, and if they still stood by what they said. Finally, we wanted each of them to read the other's explanation and comment on who was telling the truth. In addition to tracking down both men, we wanted to follow up on a few leads, including reaching out to Sirocco Jones to see if he could talk about the listing found on his website. We got a hold of Brad Buxer, and he confirmed he worked on Sonic 3. However, we were directed to his agent when we asked to do a short interview. After pitching the interview to his agent, Mr. Buxer declined to discuss the subject further, citing personal reasons. Unfortunately, he would not even confirm that he participated in the 2009 interview, and we were unable to track down the staff of the fan magazine to see if they would be willing to share their notes and documents from the interview session. Our search for Roger Hector turned out to be much more fruitful. After locating Mr. Hector, he confirmed he participated in the 2005 interview and said he stood by everything he said then. He was gracious enough to provide us with some of his time to discuss Jackson's involvement with Sonic 3.
This all started in, I'd say, 1993, early in the year, when I got a call from Sega corporate telling me that Michael Jackson would like to come by and and have a visit at STI and meet the Sonic team, which we arranged for later on that day. He sat down with our group and we had a very nice meeting. He was a big fan of the game, and the team was very excited to meet Michael Jackson, and one of the team members suggested that maybe Michael could write some music for the next game, and Michael thought it was a great idea. When the first scandal started breaking about Michael Jackson, it was taken pretty seriously at Sega, and the decision was really made in Japan that Michael Jackson's music had to be pulled, and so I got the call, and we agreed we had to go ahead and do that. Once the decision had been made to pull Michael Jackson's music from the game, we had to kind of scramble to try and replace the whole musical soundtrack, and we had Howard Drazen at STI composing new music. We also had a couple of other composers from Sega of Japan that were contributing, and it was all being somewhat edited and pulled together by Yuji Naka, who was the head of the team, and he's really the final authority on what made it into the game and what didn't. I would never say unequivocally that there was no similarity between any of the music that Michael Jackson created and what ultimately wound up in the game, but I can say that if that occurred, there was it certainly wasn't by design or by any intent on the part of Sega.
As you can see, not only did Mr. Hector stick to his guns, he offered a more detailed explanation of the events that went down, including how Jackson became involved, when and why his work was dropped, who made the call to drop Jackson's work, and what was done to replace Jackson's music in the final version. And most importantly, he stated that any similarity between Jackson's work and the final music in Sonic 3 was coincidental and not intentional. At this point, all of our leads had gone cold. We never received a response from Sirocco Jones, and our other sources never got in touch with us. Given what Roger Hector revealed, we were inclined to close the book on this case. However, one of our leads that had gone cold suddenly surfaced and provided us with a shocking revelation. Our source spoke on the condition that we keep their identity anonymous. We're permitted to say this person was directly involved with Sonic 3's development. After going back and forth via email, our source revealed the following information about Jackson's involvement with Sonic 3. When Michael Jackson first joined the development of Sonic 3, he was supposed to compose the background music for every stage, including the opening and ending themes. About halfway through development, Jackson expressed his displeasure with the sound quality of the FM oscillator on the Genesis. The music did not sound the way he intended it, and so he left the project because of these hardware limitations. What music Jackson did finish was still used in the final version of the game, and our source specifically mentioned Carnival Night Zone by name as an example of a track that still contained Jackson's work. Other composers contributed to the tracks for each act, but nobody recreated or altered any of Jackson's existing work. Our source also had some other intriguing details about Jackson's involvement. Apparently, Jackson had submitted the song Black or White to be used in Sonic 3, but due to opposition from Jackson's lawyers, it didn't make it into the final game. However, the unused FM sound source should still be in Sega's possession. They also added that while Jackson's music is present in the final version, Jackson insisted that Sega not credit him for his work because he was unhappy with the quality of the music produced by the FM oscillator, the Yamaha YM2612. So while some of Michael Jackson's work made it into the final version, he ultimately left the project due to the sound quality of the Genesis, and requested his work go uncredited. These answers contradicted Roger Hector's and other staff statements saying that Jackson's music was removed due to the scandal, and support Brad Buxer's statement in the 2009 interview that Jackson wanted the music removed due to how his music sounded on the Genesis. Mr. Buxer only speculated that if Jackson's music wasn't present in the final game, it was due to this reason, but he wasn't sure if the music was cut or not. Our source's explanation says Jackson wasn't happy, but rather than asking for the music to be removed, he simply wished to go uncredited. With such a drastically different account of what happened, we had to ask our source about the explanation that Sega dropped Jackson due to the accusations that came about. Here's what they had to say on the matter. If I remember correctly, Michael decided to step down from the project before the child molestation allegations against him. At that time, all the staff got disappointed when we received Michael's refusal. But after the allegations, I remember hearing something along the lines of, "In the end, it might have been better this way. Back then, Roger was the president of STI, a member of the Sonic team, but he wasn't really involved in the development of the game. It's just my guess, but I think he wanted to avoid giving the impression that the FM sound source was of bad quality. A few days ago, I met with the person who was in charge of the sound, and it's certain that Michael's refusal was because of the quality issue. Given the two drastically different accounts, it would be prudent to rule this as inconclusive. However, we're inclined to side with our inside source. We reached out to Sega for comment on our findings, just to be declined. So, at long last, it looks like we can finally close the book on this mystery. We finally know that not only did Michael Jackson work on Sonic 3, but that some of his work made it into the final version of the game.